Good morning, brothers and sisters in Kota Kinabalu. It's good to be able to share with you this morning. And this morning, as I prepared this sermon to share, it was in response to, almost 1.5 weeks ago when I was reading the story of Esther. Because 1.5 weeks ago, it was the festival of Purim. And festival of Purim is to celebrate the bravery of Esther as she rescue her people from the evil people who seek to destroy them. When you read this story, it's about how a Jewish girl rises up to become queen, use her position to save her people from an evil man called Haman, and together with her uncle Mordecai, then they were able to overturn the tables on them. But then when you come to chapter 9, verse 1, then you realize, in overturning the tables on them, it says that the Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. And you read down, verse 16, you find that in the end, the Jews got relief from the enemies and they killed 75,000 of them. In fact, more. Earlier on, they were killing 500 plus a few others. And so we struggle with this issue. Here's a story where the Jews, when they were attacked, turned the tables and didn't allow the enemies to attack them. They attacked the enemies instead, and then they killed in the process 75,000 people. The story raises a lot of questions, like, for example, can God's people be involved in violence? Doesn't the Ten Commandments have a commandment that says, thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not murder? Isn't that applicable? And what does the Bible actually teach us about violence and non-violence? Or does it actually teach us about passive resistance? You can defend to a certain extent. And what about all the stories of war and violence in the Bible? Not just in the Old Testament, even the New Testament uses imageries of soldiers and war. The last book of Revelation talks about a final war that will take place in Armageddon. And it will therefore raise questions. What about we today as Christians? Can we participate in war? Can we take up arms to defend ourselves if a nation attacks us? What is war? In the Webster Dictionary, war is defined as a contest between two nations or two sovereign states. And of course, there are different reasons why war is waged. Sometimes war is defensive. And I'm attacked, I defend myself. But sometimes war is waged with ulterior motives. When a nation wants to expand its borders and the neighboring nation is just nearby, so we swallow them up to expand our borders. Or perhaps to increase our wealth and our commerce, we take over another nation and take over all that they have. To acquire more territory, to be more superior over you of another nation. So there could be ulterior motives behind a war. So some wars, therefore, we have to say are not just because there is no just reason for a nation to attack another nation. Other times, war is declared in order to defend ourselves, and maybe we say maybe at that time we may allow for such wars. There are different types of wars fought. As I say, offensive wars, when you go on the offensive and aggressively attack another nation. You have defensive wars, where you have to declare war in order to defend yourself. There's public war, which is fought openly between two nations. You can have covert wars fought often, sometimes underneath, quietly, but there's a war going on. And sometimes there's also civil war. Within a single nation is at war within itself. Some parts of a nation is attacking another part of a nation. So war takes many forms. And what is the people's response to war? We find that generally there is a whole spectrum of responses. On one extreme, you have what we call the warmongers. Warmongering are people who are like the hawks. A hawk is a bird of carrion, like a vulture, an eagle, attacks. And so these are people who say, war is always allowed. No, we always go to war. On the other extreme, you have the people who are total pacifists, total pacifism. These are the doves, the turtle doves and the doves who believe in peace. War is never right in all circumstances. Then as you move closer to the middle, you also find one part where defensivism. That's a position that says that, some wars may be okay, especially like wars of defense, acts of deterrence to stop more killing, well, that should be just and allowed. And you'll find on the other side what we call conditional pacifism. That means, war in principle is always wrong, but maybe sometimes we have to go to war in order to stop more suffering. So as you find it, you move to the middle, you find that there are different responses. Now, if you look at it, where do we stand in this whole spectrum from one end, which is more warmongering, all the way to the other end, which is total pacifism? Where do we stand? Is there a middle way forward? What does the Bible have to say about war and violence? If you look at the Old Testament, you find that the Old Testament tells us that God's people live in a context where war was part and parcel of that whole situation. It was a time of conquer or be conquered, swallow or be swallowed up. You have no choice. And especially when you are a small nation caught between sometimes two big powers, it is like the Malay peribahasa, gajah sama gajah berjuang berlantuk mati di tengah. You either get stepped in between because when two big powers fight. So in ancient times, you find that God did allow his own people, the people of Israel, to participate in certain wars. Okay, they were able to participate in certain select wars. We call this the Holy War in the book of Joshua and in the first part of 1 Samuel. Certain times Israel was allowed to go to war. So when they came, after walking through the wilderness up from Egypt, they came to the Holy Land, and Joshua brought the people across. But the land was occupied. They were Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. So they had to drive out the people in the land. So that war was called a holy war. And it was only for a certain period of time. After the beginning part of 1 Samuel, you find that call, that injunction to go to holy war was never repeated again. It's only for a certain time and certain period. And God fights for his people. So God is a divine warrior. He's called Yahweh Sevaoth. Yahweh, of the hosts, the heavenly hosts, the heavenly armies. And Yahweh fights on behalf of his people. And in Isaiah 40, we find that when the people return home from exile, God is the one whose mighty arm delivers his people. Driving aside all the obstacles, and God leads his people home. But all these images of war and God as a divine warrior is always balanced. It's always balanced with the injunction, thou shalt not murder. It's part of the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20 verse 13. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill is something to counter with this whole argument about killing. Because life is sacred. It is God who gives life. And the people of God are told by Moses, choose life or choose death. Life is sacred. God gives life to us to enjoy. And God is also a God of peace, a God of shalom. Shalom is not just peace, but wellness, whole being. And God wants that. And we are called to be heralds, to go up the mountaintops, to shout and proclaim shalom to all people. So in the Old Testament, although there is pictures of war and all this, it's also counterweight by the fact that we should be bringers of good news of peace and shalom. New Testament, of course, is much clearer by the time. We find from Jesus teaching Paul and Peter. So Jesus tells us about non-violence. If someone slaps you on one cheek, we're supposed to offer the other cheek. Be willing to walk a second mile. So that means we don't respond evil with evil, but we respond evil with good. And Paul again mentioned this in Romans 12. Resist and do not repay evil with evil, but repay evil with good. Overcome evil with good. If people do something like this to you, you do something good. And in doing so, it is like pouring hot coals upon the head, as Paul says. And Peter reminds us that Jesus set us the example. Jesus did not revile in return when he was reviled. Jesus did not threaten when he was threatened. Jesus set us the example. And that is the gospel of peace, of shalom that we proclaim, because we follow the example of agape, divine love. So the Bible teaches, therefore, we should always be in the position of non-violence. We always should be in the position of peace and declaring peace and agape love instead. Well, that is the ideal. But we realize we live in a fallen world where ideal sometimes is hard to live. In the early church, as the Christians began to expand and began to multiply, well, they responded to all these threats of persecution and whatever, they were a minority, they were generally persecuted, they gladly walked the second mile, they gladly turned the other cheek. So Christians were sometimes arrested, thrown into the Colosseum, killed by gladiators, eaten by lions, dipped in bitumen, in tar, and set alight as human torches. The Christians did all this, they suffered. And when it came to the whole area of should we serve in the army, should we serve in the police, they said no, we don't, because that has an element of violence. Well, so far so good. But then came the 3rd century, and you find there was a change. Constantine, the Roman emperor, became a Christian. Suddenly, Christianity no longer is now a persecuted faith, a persecuted religion. Christianity is now the official religion of the empire. Christians are now in high places, and they are now the leaders. And Christians began to serve in the military and in the police. And here was where we find attention began to grow. On one hand, we are told, well, non-violence and peace and agape love is our norm. So how can we serve in the military and in the police where sometimes force and violence is used? But then the Christians began to ask, if we don't serve, then we have to depend on non-Christians to serve as soldiers in the military and police. And then where are all the Christians then? We are the leaders, but we don't serve in the army. Then what should we do? And slowly, as Rome, outlived its power and began to decay, and the Germanic tribes up north, the other tribes like the Wishnov, and then Attila the Hun came, and they actually invaded and ransacked Rome. So that raised up a very pertinent issue among Christians. Can Christians take up arms and participate in violence and war? Because if you don't defend your Christian nation, the Roman Empire, then against all these Huns, they come and ransack and they kill and they rob and they plunder and they steal, and you die. We Christians to take up the position of non-violence, total non-violence, and not respond at all. The early Christian theologians began to struggle, and we find that some of the early Christian theologians, like the Bishop of Milan, St. Ambrose, began to work out something which eventually will be known as the just war theory. And this was picked up by St. Augustine, who lived in Carthage in Rome, and he also struggled with this whole issue. Now that Rome is Christian, and this whole Roman Empire is Christian, then what is the place of Christians serving in the army? Can we go to war when the emperor commands us? If we don't want to fight them, should never be in the army. And then you come to a very peculiar situation where all the army is made up of non-Christians, because Christians don't want to take part. Can that be possible? Because if we have a whole army of non-Christians, then how do you ensure that the Christian faith is protected? And so it came to Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages. He started what is known as the Scholastic School, and it was Thomas Aquinas who began to flesh out this whole theory of just war. And he wrote a whole doctrinal set of teaching called Summa Theologica. And here it came to a part in part 2, QQ1 to 189, those pages, where now he comes to that difficult issue of war. And he asks actually 4 questions. He says, is there some kind of war where it is lawful? What it means is he already in his mind he can say, well, yeah, not all wars are lawful. Not all laws are just. When a nation aggressively attacks a smaller nation, for those that are ulterior motives, that war can never be just. So, but he says, but are there some kind of war in which it is lawful? And then the next issue comes. What about priests? What about the pastors, the clerics? Can they go to war? Can they fight? Are we only just doing our work of preaching, or can we become a soldier one day and take up arms? And then third question, well, is it lawful for belligerents to lay ambush? It means he's saying that war must be honorable, chivalrous. When we fight now, there should be honorable means. To use deception and lay ambush, attack another person, that is very deceptive. And he says that in wartime, can we use such deceptive ways to attack and take advantage of the enemy? And then fourth question he asked was, is it lawful to fight on holy days? especially when it's like Christmas time. Can we go to war? And you know, when the nation of Israel was attacked in 73, it was the Yom Kippur War. It was Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. The Arab nations took that opportunity to attack Israel right when the Jews were celebrating Yom Kippur. It was a very, you can say, a very low blow. And of course, the Jews lost the first few days of the war because they were totally not prepared. They were all observing this holy day. So, Aquinas just asked the question, you know, is it lawful to fight on a holy day when you're observing all your religious observances? You know, it's a very deceptive way to attack. So he believed that to answer this whole issue of whether war can be just, there must be three conditions that has to be met. First condition, we have to ask ourselves, has the war been declared on proper authority? That means you need someone with proper authority to declare a war. So no Tom, Dick and Harry can simply just call a nation to go to war. So in those days, perhaps the Pope as the highest authority or the Holy Roman Emperor with the authority can declare a war. Secondly, is there a just cause of the war? Again, if a nation were to take advantage of a smaller nation because you have certain wealth there, you know, certain minerals I want to take over, there's no just cause of the war, then that war is not just. So we have to ask ourselves, is there a just cause of the war? And thirdly, is the war waged with good intention? That means again, are there ulterior motives behind the war? Are we going to war in order to save a small nation being bullied by another nation? That would be at least with a right intention. But if there's no right intention, then that war is not just. Today, some modern proponents of the just war theory add two more conditions to it and says war should be waged only if there's a reasonable chance of success. If you know you're going to fight a war and you're going to lose in the end, then there's no chance of success. Then don't go to war because you're going to lose men and lose energy and time and effort, you know, and in the end you don't achieve your purpose. A fifth condition was the means of war must be proportionate to the ends. That means when you want to achieve certain things, the means to achieve it must be proportionate. It's like you cannot use excessive force to achieve in the end. It's like you want to shoot a fly, you take an elephant gun. An elephant gun are those guns which has a huge barrel at the end, and then it shoots out a lot of ball bearings, a lot of these lead pellets. You know, just to shoot something that's so tiny, you use a huge elephant gun to shoot. That means is not proportionate. So he's saying, therefore, in order to go to war and achieve a certain means, the means to achieve it must be proportionate. It cannot be totally excessive. Now, if you look at these 5 conditions, if we can take all of it, and even if the conditions are met and say, okay, we meet all the conditions, therefore war is just, it still raises a difficult issue because there's some of us as Christians who say, I don't believe in killing at all. Even if a war is just and permitted and morally allowed, I don't believe in killing because all form of killing and violence is wrong. Then what do you do? You see? So if you take a just war theory, you are saying therefore that some form of war is acceptable. But what about those people who says, I don't believe in killing, I don't believe in war, I don't believe in violence at all? So as a Christian, what is our response to war? I don't believe we can take the extreme spectrum of warmongering. Unfortunately, there are Christians in some Western countries who are warmongers. They believe that it's okay to go to war, totally okay. But neither can we take the other extreme of total pacifism to say that I do not support war at all. That means you're saying if a nation is attacked and overrun by another nation, it's okay because I don't take part in war. But the problem is, you do not take any action, you end up actually taking some action at all. You at least end up siding with the enemy. John Philpott Curran said, evil prosper when good men do nothing. We often attribute that to another guy, Edmund Burke, but actually Curran was the one who said this. Evil prosper when good men do nothing. It's when good men do nothing, that's why evil continue to thrive and continue to prosper and spread. So by not doing nothing, by not doing anything, you are actually also siding. That means neutrality doesn't really help. To be neutral, enemy takes opportunity and continues to prosper. So is there a middle option? Well, as I said, on one hand, we Christians believe that violence and killing, all this is all wrong. But we realize that the reality of the world is such that sometimes maybe war might be permitted. Maybe war might be permissible. So they argue for this just war tradition. Just war tradition says that certain wars perhaps may be morally justified. So therefore, it's saying Christians, we have to be selective in our participation in wars, and we have to be selective in our obedience. That means you have to take these two issues together. Selective participation, selective obedience. Now, we can again, even then we cannot impose this upon all Christians. Because you will find again, Christians will have a whole spectrum of beliefs. Some Christians will still take the view, no, I cannot take up arms, I cannot go to war at all. Other Christians may say, maybe at certain times I may be permitted to take up arms to go to war. So each of us will have to listen to our own conscience and obey our conscience, because we can't force someone against his own conscience. So this just war theory is saying that there may be times when war is permissible. Now, today when we look at our modern context, we realize that we have to rethink through also the just war, because we need to adapt it to our modern situation. Because why? The modern society is so different than in the old days. In the old days, it was very clear-cut. In the old days, it was a pagan nation, invading Christian Roman Empire. Well, okay, we can see it is clearly good versus evil, so you go to war and, your conscience is clear. But in today, in the modern world, the lines are blurred in many ways. First, for example, many wars are fought by proxies. No longer is this two human army fighting like that. Today, war is fought by proxies. You send drones to do your war for you. You send drones to shoot, to fight for you. And today, we have all these guided missile systems, smart missiles. Smart missiles are so smart. They can pinpoint you on your phone calling, and they can trace the signal, and they just key that in, and that smart missile finds you wherever you are. And then you realize you die because a smart missile found you. So that is how war is fought even today, which is so, you can say, there's very little of the human element actively involved. It's all fought by proxies. And today war also can be very fast and very deadly. All you need is just to press one button and you annihilate a whole nation. Those days, wars were fought and you can take years, days and weeks. Today, war can be over in just with one push of a button, nuclear war. And today, we find that very often, yes, we say, let the soldiers fight the war, it's their business. But very often, civilians are caught in the middle, and civilians are the ones, very often, the women, the children, the non-combatants, they're the ones who pay the heavy prices. They're the ones who suffer the most. Again, today the wars are also blurred. It's no longer so clear-cut. One nation is good, one nation is evil when they fight. Today, what if two nations are also Christian nations? Take a look at Russia and Ukraine. Both nations are Russian Orthodox. It's so difficult to draw the line. So that when their own citizens pray to God, a Ukrainian Christian pray to God, a Russian Christian pray to God, who is God going to listen to? Because both nations are Christians. So the line is blurred, you see. And what if today our government make war on its own civilians? The enemy is the government, not an invading force from the outside. The government is the one that is attacking you. And then we remember Romans 13 to talk about, to obey our government. But the government is the one killing us. Look at what's happening in Myanmar. The military junta is the one going out killing the civilians. So today war has changed. The face of war is so different. And what is our response? It's harder to respond today, especially when war is now so different. So just war may be a way for us to think, because just war reminds us that, first, selective participation. It tells us that not all wars are just. We have to see which war is morally justified. It's telling us that sometimes it is not right to take up arms. We may have to take up arms if perhaps our nation is attacked by an outside nation. An outside nation invades us, and our nation calls the citizens to defend itself. And maybe here in this case, some of us as Christians may say, I'll respond to the call of my government to take up arms to defend my nation. To defend our nation is to defend your family, your loved ones, so that they don't die needlessly when another nation attacks our nation. Some of us will say, no, I will respond, but I will take part in non-war efforts. Well, possible. We can take part, for example, in the medical side. You can become, involved in the ambulance services, in the Red Cross. You don't fight. So you wear your army hat with a Red Cross to identify that you are non-combatant, you are in the medical. Or you can take part as a chaplain. You are in the forefront, but you don't carry a gun, you carry the Bible to encourage the troops. You can take part in those. Or perhaps if a small nation call us, help me, I'm being attacked and my people are suffering. And perhaps you as this nation that's being appealed to, you may want to respond to help someone under aggression. Because as Philip Yancey says, just praying alone is not enough sometimes. You can't just stand and watch people dying. Let's say, for example, our neighbor, Singapore, is being attacked by another nation. And they call us to help because historically there are ties between Singapore and us. We all belong to one in the past. And you can't just say, sorry, that's none of my business. Sorry, I'm a Christian, I don't believe in war, I cannot go to war, I cannot help you. I don't think we can just avoid all this and say, I'll pray for you, brother. Maybe sometimes you may have to do more because you can't just look at our neighbor down south being invaded and hundreds and thousands are dying and you don't do anything. So we have to be selective in our participation in wars. Not all wars are just. And then we have to be selectively obeying. Sometimes our government may ask us, okay, we're going to go to war against Thailand, to conquer Thailand because it has all its natural resources. In that case, then we have to be selective in our obedience. We have to say to our government, no, I cannot take part in a war like this because there are no moral grounds. It is not justified. And you'll be willing to pay the price of incarceration. Then the government will say, okay, you don't obey me, then throw you into prison. And we may be willing to go to prison for this case. Okay, so we have to operate with very clear principles. Ultimately, Acts 5:25, we must obey God rather than man. Because yes, we understand authority, like the centurion in Matthew 8:9. He tells Jesus, you don't need to come to my house. You just say the word. I can accept it because I'm a centurion. I am under orders. I know who are those above me, and I have people underneath me. I know what a word can be. A word has power. So I know what it means to obey. And sometimes we have to obey, but it doesn't mean blind obedience. It's never blind obedience. It doesn't mean that because my prime minister called me to go to war, I will go to war. No, you have to be saying, is the war just in the first place? Even if the prime minister called me to go to war, I'm not willing to go to war. Maybe in the past, in the crusades, sometimes even if the Pope calls you to go to war, to fight in this crusade, but you realize that crusade has ulterior motives. It's not meant to free Jerusalem, from the invaders, but it was ulterior motive, to gain more land, to more riches. Then you may have to say, no, I'm not willing to go. So just war theory force us to look at each situation and ask a question: Is the war justifiable? Is it morally just? If it's not, then you may have to take a position of non-violence. You have to say, no, I cannot obey. So what is our mission church response? Especially when we live in a world of conflict. So today, look at the Russia-Ukraine conflict. What is our response? Okay, Malaysia, well, the Prime Minister said it's just an escalated conflict. Well, it's a war. It's not a conflict, it's a war. And what do we do? Do all we can to be involved in the peace process. Are we helping? Are we helping the people? Are we taking in refugees when they're fleeing the country? Are we sending in efforts to aid those who are suffering? The people are trapped without food, without supplies, without water. It's not just enough to be praying, And very often, sometimes we send aid. So we may have to think about something like this. Or what about the Myanmar junta that's going around killing the civilians? Again, we often say, leave it to ASEAN to solve the problem. But ASEAN sometimes is not doing enough. we as Christians can put pressure on our government to take a more active stand, put pressure on the military junta. And here is where the West is putting all these sanctions on Russia to force Russia to make a decision to come to peace, to come to the table to talk and negotiate and end the war. So we may have to put pressure on the Myanmar government. You can't be doing this on your own people and apply sanctions. But sometimes our government doesn't want to do this. So we Christians may have to be a force to put pressure on the government to take active steps. And look at what's happening around in the Middle East. We have the Al-Qaeda, the ISIS, nearer to home, the Philippines, you have Abu Sayyaf. And even in Africa, they have the Boko Haram they go around, killing Christians, kidnapping the children, and force them to become soldiers for their army. Again, we have to stand and say, these wars are going on, these conflicts are going on, it's not right. We have to make a stand to speak out against such things. And even, we are very good in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Our Malaysian government speaks a lot and support, and there's so much fun going in to have the Palestinian conflict. Good. But what about other groups that are going on? What about the religious conflicts in India between not just in Hindus and Muslims, but Hindus and even Muslims are suffering as well? Or China with the policy against the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Are we speaking up or just keeping silence? As a Christian, yes, we are involved in shalom, in peacemaking. Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers. We must do all we can to actively promote peace and seek peace. Praying alone, praying and just say, brother, I pray for you, is not good enough. We must be actively promoting peace, helping to avoid war as much as we can, willing to be mediators to help people to come to an agreement. We must be actively doing this. But where are the nation? Where is the church in all this in Malaysia? We are sometimes so silent. We have no place to, no active contribution to what's happening. Albert Einstein says peace cannot be kept by force, can only be achieved by understanding. We have to help both sides to come to an agreement to see what's wrong. The aggressor to see that you are the aggressor, and that's wrong. It's against God's will, and you have to stop what you're doing. We have to sometimes sit down and say, look, come to our senses. War is not helping anybody. The whole world gets affected. And sometimes I think we Malaysians are so apathetic. We say the war is so far off, it doesn't affect me. It affects all of us one way or another. Philip Yancey, let me end with this, wrote a very wonderful piece where he talks about, we have no more tears left. And you can go and look at this article. It's not just enough to pray. We must be actively doing something. And I think we can be doing something. Okay? We can be a powerful voice to put pressure on our government to do something positive. We can be an active voice to take part in writing, perhaps, advocating peace and writing to pressure the Russian government to stop their war. We can be doing more. Very often, I think we Christians are not doing enough. Okay? And I hope we don't wait till one day when we ourselves are being attacked. And then we will then only start thinking about the question, what is the response as a Christian? Should we take part? Do you want to take part? We must start thinking now. What is our position now? Am I a total pacifist? I don't have anything to do? No, you get overrun. Or am I a warmonger? War is always good? No, I think we have to think of a middle way. And the middle way is actually what the Bible advocates. Yes, it is not just non-violent, but it's passive resistance. We have to sometimes resist evil. We cannot let evil just run wild and all this. Remember, when good men do nothing, evil prosper. We have to sometimes face evil squarely in the face and say, enough is enough. Okay. So as a Christian, what is your position? Should you actively be involved? Do all you can within your means? Passive resistance, resist evil when you have to resist it, but in non-violent ways. I think we have to think through. If one day Malaysia gets attacked, if one day we face war, what will be our stand as a Christian? Let's pray. Father, we know that as Christians sometimes we often just take the position, we should be totally non-violent. But when we don't do anything, it also doesn't solve the problem. So what more can we do apart from praying? I think the examples of people who take the position of passive resistance remind us that evil need to be resisted, and there are times when we have to meet it head on, face to face. If your nation is attacked, we can't just sit back and say we don't do anything. Our loved ones, they may die because we don't do anything. Sometimes we may have to meet force with force, whether we like it or not. So we have to think through and ask ourselves, what is my response to war and violence? Am I going to just sit back and do nothing and see my nation overrun, see my loved ones killed? Or am I willing to sometimes perhaps even go to war in order to end the suffering, in order to lessen more deaths, in order to stop the conflict? Each of us have to look at ourselves and say, what is my position? What is my stand towards war and violence? Is all war permitted, allowed, permissible? Or should we ask ourselves, selective participation, selective obedience? Let us hear your voice. Let us hear your spirit telling us, speaking to us. Let us discern what we are called to do as a church. And may we rise up and respond to the challenges that we face. We pray this in Jesus' wonderful name, the one who is the Prince of Peace. Amen.